Streaming live via the internet. Welcome to ISP Radio, your weekly source for ISP-related news, events, and interviews with industry experts. If you deliver internet via fiber optic, wireless, coax, or any other way, you're in the right place. Chat live with us weekly via ispradio.com every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. And now a brief word from our sponsors. Link Technology, providing ISP consulting, support, and hardware for wireless ISPs. TowerCoverage.com, providing online RF coverage maps. Mimosa Networks, providing high-density, high-bandwidth radio products. Advanced LLC, providing retail and wholesale advanced communication services by matching providers with your bandwidth needs. And by Sitel, providing reliability in surge suppression. And now your host for ISP Radio, Steve Grabiel and Dennis Burgess.
Welcome to ISP Radio. I'm your host, Steve Grabiel, broadcasting from Moriarty, New Mexico, and Dennis is broadcasting from St. Louis. Been producing the show as well. A beautiful day out here in New Mexico. It's probably going to be around 60, 62 degrees, unheard of in January.
You're so lucky.
Yeah, I think you guys got the storm we got last Thursday. I think at my house I got about 18 inches of snow. Well, but I think that's what's blowing through. Yeah. But anyways, so
we're not supposed to get that till this weekend, but
right. Well, so welcome again to ISP Radio. Like I said, I'm Steve, and Dennis is chiming in. So, Dennis, anything good on the news front for ISPs?
Oh, yeah. We got some great information. So, first off, some upcoming events. Now, for those of you that's been listening to the show, you probably know about both of these, but I want to make sure I point them out. Very first one, Animal Farm 9 show in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's going to be held at the State Fair Park both February 4th and 5th. The primary focus of this show is for Canopy and cadmium-based wireless ISPs, but there will be other vendors there, such as UBNT, KPP, etc. If interested, visit afmug.com for more information. The first big show, though, of 2015 is right around the corner. That is WISP America, and it starts Monday, February 23rd, and runs till Thursday, the 26th. This show is the one that WISPA puts on, and it moves between cities each year. This year, it's going to be hosted right here in my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, at Union Station. As I said, it's right around the corner, and the room rates have been extended, so visit wispa.org for all of that information, show, agenda, etc. Now, the big thing that we got in the news this week is the FCC put out a public notice yesterday, January 27th, specifically aimed at hotel Wi-Fi blocking. I'm going to quote from this notice. No hotel, convention center, or other commercial establishment, or the network operator providing such services at these establishments may intentionally block or disrupt personal Wi-Fi hotspots on such premises. Now, Marriott recently settled an investigation and paid a civil penalty of over $600,000 when these types of actions occurred. Now, this is not the, quote, rogue access point detection that we see. There's two different types of systems that we find. The rogue one is typically designed to find access points that are plugged into the switching system of a specific network. So think of it as, hey, I'm operating a network, and I want to make sure there's not a extra access point plugged into my switching system, giving somebody wireless access that should not. That type of system typically turns off the switching port. The type of system that we're looking for, or that the FCC has ruled against, is the system that does deauthentication attacks against access points that are, quote, not yours. They could be operating with different SSIDs, and typically they operate on their own independent network. The big thing is think about those little Wi-Fi hotspots or MiFis, things like that you see from the cell companies. Basically, the FCC noted that this is prohibited in federal law for both the operation, marketing, and sale of any type of jamming equipment. There's a number of access point systems that not only go to the point of, hey, there's a rogue IP out there, but also will send that deauth attack against these unknown or invalid access points within reach. So if you have one of those systems, I'm not going to say which brands offer those, but if you have one of those, make sure that feature is off. You may find yourself talking to the FCC if not, and as we've already said, there are substantial civil penalties. So with that, back to you, Steve.
Well, Dennis, that brings up a good point, and we've talked about this earlier. Doesn't that go against Part 15 of the FCC?
Well, that was the big thing. A lot of people had asked that question: is it against Part 15? And what happened was Marriott basically asked the FCC and said, we need a ruling. We need someone to definitively say, can we do this or can we not? Because there are a number of systems that provide this feature. And whenever you sit there and think, like in the military arena or top secret arena, things like that, I can see the need for such of a device. But simply put, that's what the FCC did with this public notice. Basically said, no, you cannot do this.
Yeah, no, you cannot do this. And by the way, we're going to smack you.
Yeah, if you get done. And, the Marriott even said, they said it wasn't a security risk or a security threat to its own network, etc. As I said, the two big main points, one, if you're using rogue detection on a network system, a lot of times what happens is you'll find a switch port at which data comes in on, and they turn off that switch port. That's perfectly legitimate, because what you're looking for is an access point that's plugged into your network that is not valid. The flip side of this, and this is specifically what the FCC has said, is really MiFis, the personal hotspots, things like that, they cannot just simply turn those off. They cannot over-the-air attack those or send some type of de-authentication attack to prevent those from operating even within their establishments.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting news. FCC going after private industry, but I think that in this case it's probably a good thing. You don't want your cell phone MiFi being stomped on at a hotel.
And think of this, though. If they said, hey, that was fine, then does that mean that I can turn on de-authentication attacks on all my access points up on towers? All of a sudden, nobody's Wi-Fi works unless I allow it. So now we get all these attacks. It's a bad thing. It's a very good move, I think, by the FCC to at least establish those guidelines.
Right, very prudent. Well, today on the show we have a company called Telrad, and we have Patrick Leary. He's the Director of Business Development in North America for Telrad. And Telrad is a company providing us with microwave equipment to provide better bandwidth. So with that, I'd like to introduce Patrick. Patrick, you there?
I am. Good morning, Stephen, and also Dennis. How are you?
Excellent.
So, Patrick, tell us a little bit about the history of Telrad, where it is, and what you guys do.
Sure. And by the way, you mentioned the things falling from the sky, or your weather out there. Where I am, the only thing that's falling from the sky are the grapefruits from my tree. So, sorry.
Oh, must be nice.
Yeah, about 62 and sunny and light breeze. So Telrad's been around actually since 1951.
Wow.
Who knew? I certainly didn't before I joined this company. Why didn't I know that? That's because Nortel private labeled their gear and sold it into people like AT&T. So what's interesting is that depending on how old you are, and I'm roughly 50, so I'm an old dude, but if you're in rural America, at least my age or so, good chance you've talked across a Telrad-made switch, the DMS 100s, that AT&T largely used in small markets were made by Telrad. So there was a point at which Nortel owned about 20% of Telrad. And we all know what happened there. So when they went boom, something else had to be done. So after, I guess, some soul searching, this was around 2000, 2002, or later, I think the organization decided that it would get into wireless. And ultimately what happened is that as an Israeli company, they decided they could leverage their rural telecom, both their rural and telecom roots, but move it into wireless. And the opportunity really presented itself to do that when Alvarian basically decided they needed to sell some of his assets. So in 2013, Telrad picked up roughly half of Alvarion. They picked up the licensed WiMAX side of the business. They didn't pick up all the unlicensed which is most of the stuff that people were using in the States. And they've gone from there. So the company actually has a couple subsidiaries. One is called Oasis. They build high-end data centers for like stock exchanges, banks, military war rooms. They do some very interesting, weird stuff. The other company is called Megalcom, which actually builds networks, soup to nuts, towers, everything. But they do it in developing markets like the African continent. They don't do that here. But what's cool is both those two different organizations bring some operator-level knowledge into the company that wasn't there under the half of Alvarion. Also, with that Alvarion purchase came all the R&D guys, about 120 people, primarily engineers. So they've been good. They've been executing very well, pretty close to their roadmap plans. Sometimes you slip, sometimes you move ahead a little bit. But here we are in 2015, and we're enduring a really nice little bump in business, shall we say.
Well, good. So tell us a little bit about the product. So I come to you at a trade show. What do you do?
So we do a lot of the same things that the other manufacturers do, except we do it very, very differently in a different sort of platform. What's different about it? Well, I think there are three things that's really making us stand out. First of all, this is a software-defined radio, a true software-defined radio. It's something that can actually, it started its life as WiMAX. Most of us are tired of talking about that and have for years. But it started its life as WiMAX and actually has the ability via software only, no climb, to transition to LTE. And that's in the process of happening right now. A lot of the operators trialing it will be trialing it from LTE to start. Some of them already are on the LTE load. So that's one. It's an SDR radio with lots of spare capacity, so it literally changes the CapEx formula. Instead of a 2 to 3 year model, you're looking at infrastructure that can carry you 7 to 10 years before you have to swap it out, because the capacity doubles, triples, quadruples over time. Second, the system specs are really phenomenal. For example, if you're looking at minus our QAM 64 and 5.6, that modulation, we're at minus 75. Most of the things the guys on the show would be listening to, they top out at that same modulation at minus 67. So we have a huge sensitivity advantage that materializes into much better non-line of sight performance. The second is that we are a 4x4 radio. So that gives you a 3 dB uplink advantage compared to a 2x2. So there's another big benefit in helping the non-line of sight. The third thing, I think, is that since it is LTE now, you're talking about speeds that this industry isn't used to seeing, certainly not used to seeing, and then being able to do that through trees and to do it in scale. One of my beta operators, Daniel Moore at Ungoy in Iowa, told me last night he just connected at 3 miles, which in itself isn't all that impressive, but it was a non-line of sight shot that he couldn't connect before, and he did it where he's seeing between 70 and 80 megs.
Wow.
That's just crazy stuff. So the gear, it's not cheap, but when you kind of aggregate all its capabilities, you know, maybe 3x better coverage in the footprint than anything else most guys have used, much higher capacities, the ability to do things in scale, and even the performance of the CPE. The CPE has built-in SIP with, in ATAs. It's got RG11s right on the PoE. It's got built-in ping. It's got built-in iPerf. It's got built-in surge suppression. It's all in there. And, it's just a crazy, well-performing system that I think is desperately needed right now, because non-line of sight performance has actually, in my opinion, taken a step backwards to where many of us were way back in 1999 and 2000 when you could use 2.4. And you can't do that now, but the non-line of sight performance was actually better then. We're able to get with our 365 range through trees as well or better than anything you're using in 900, but at much higher capacities.
That's the interesting part. So I saw a video that you guys put together of driving around a tower and being out of sight from the tower, and you were basically commenting that you still had service with no line of sight. It's true non-line of sight stuff, right?
It is true non-line of sight stuff. So that's, most people have great difficulty believing this stuff until they experience it. So because of that, one of my partners decided, you know what, I'm going to offer drive tests, because he's got this stuff in both its 2.5 variant and its 3.65 variant on a tower on the western edge of Wisconsin with a partner of his that has an EBS license. So we go up and we do drive tests sometimes, both 3.65 and 2.5. And by the way, some of my other partners, like ISP Supplies, is adding a demo site for their location as well. But when people experience, we take them, the first place we take them is about a mile and a half away behind a big stand of pines. And to a person, they have said, oh, we wouldn't even think about connecting here. We would just drive right by this spot. And then we connect that, and we connect it full boat. Not very impressive because it's pretty close, but it's going through a big stand of pines. And then we drive 10 minutes down through ravines, because this is kind of river country in Minnesota. And we get to this point that we like to call the sheep hole, because it's actually a little sheep farm. And stopping there, you look at the hill beside you that kind of looms over, and it seems absolutely ridiculous that you could ever plan to connect. The truth is, in a real model, would you really connect that guy? Maybe, because there's a spot right there that in summer and in winter, he's gotten as good as minus 77. That's at 3.11 miles down in a hole. And that video, I just kind of ad hoc started recording on the way back and I kicking myself for not doing it during the shot. But the customer was just so freaked out. He jumped out, he looked at the antenna, and on the way back, you can hear him mumbling in the back seat, I don't understand how this is working. I don't understand how this is working. Because he saw something that he didn't expect possible. And this was a guy that all day he had been experiencing the 2.5, because he has a 2.5 license out in Oregon. This was Eric Osrelic with the company called Webformix, and he won't mind my mentioning his name. He wasn't really interested in 3.65. But we said, you know what, for giggles, let us show you something. And that's the last shot we did that day, and he dropped his jaw. And everyone does. Nathan from Whisper dropped his jaw when he saw it, and we didn't do something nearly as impressive as that particular shot. We did something about half the distance, but it was with a lot of forest in front of him. Mm-hmm. And, after all the testing that those guys did, and Nathan is a tough, cautious, very considered and deliberate executive, and they're very busy. But he put us through our paces in both the 2.5 and the 3.65, and we're really pleased and fortunate that they allowed us to announce with them last week that they signed about a $2.3 million deal for about a 12-month rollout, which is them going big. And it's quite the endorsement for us, because he's an incredibly class act. Anyone that knows him knows that.
Oh, yeah, he serves on the WISPA board of directors with myself as well, and I can tell you right now he is definitely a tough nut to crack whenever it comes to the business world in his operations.
Yeah, he runs pretty much everything, and he tries everything, and he probably will continue to do so. But he was first looking at this as only a replacement for his 900 megahertz, which is very common how people start looking at us. And anything that happens beyond that tends to be organic once they experience it, and they start thinking, maybe we should look at this more broadly. But that's how they came upon it. But he ultimately came to the conclusion, and this was, a lot of the reasons I'm speaking to you now is because of the things that he told me and basically encouraged us to do. I frankly thought that a lot of WISPs today would be off the table for me. And this is a guy, me, who's been in this business a long time. I should have known better, because there are a lot of WISPs laying fiber. And I don't care what you call yourself. If you're laying fiber, you're spending money, you understand CapEx, and you know how to calculate value. So when it boiled down to it, he said, listen, this is different for me. I can look at this as a 7 to 10 year sort of model without ever climbing again and still keeping up in capacities. I mean, the gear as it ships under its first load of LTE all day long with a conservative oversubscription, with only one of the 2 channels active in the base station, you could do probably about 45 customers doing 25 meg service. With both carriers, which is to say both channels active, you could do about 90. And then maybe 15 months from now, with multi-user MIMO and these other things coming into the radio, again, just via software, those numbers double. So you're talking about potentially 180 25 meg customers realistically being able to be served from one base station. And that's with a conservative oversubscription, assuming the following: only 75% availability at full capacity and about a 15-to-1 oversubscription, which in a scheduled environment is realistic, even in a Netflix world.
You mentioned something interesting, 2.5.
Correct. Yeah, so we do the EBS and the BRS band as well, and also there's a 2.3 variant coming. For us, in fact, our CPE covers both of those bands. And in LTE, they call that band 40 and 41. 40 is 2.3, what we all know as the WCS band, and LTE band 41 is the band that we know as 2.5, or the EBS BRS bands that cover 194 megahertz of spectrum, right? Both of those products and its hardware form factor have been shipping for months and months and months. But I haven't been talking much about them because they were only doing it in WiMAX. And, buddy, I'm over it, because I was one of the first guys that ever heard the word WiMAX, and Intel popped in a booth way back in 2002 and started talking about this thing. I'm done with it because WiMAX caps out at a certain capacity. It's no more evolution. There's no more R&D happening. I want LTE. I want what it gives me in capacity. I want to be able to do interoperability with other CPE. I want it because I think you're going to see traffic systems, cameras, and other stuff embedded with LTE chips. I want it because it's a forward path with investment that just keeps on going. Mm-hmm. And we're leveraging investment of these giant companies spending billions of dollars. All we have to do is decide what's best to bring in that makes sense, because not everything does. This is a standard that was designed for mobile first. So we've had to do some innovative stuff that no one else in the industry is doing. For example, Layer 2 is not supported in LTE. So we've had to create that. So we've created an LTE core that supports Layer 2, static IP, being able to do VLANs, that sort of thing. Layer 2 doesn't support radius. So we created that too. And in fact, we're providing the hooks for the free radius community to connect into it. We're doing whatever help we can to any company that's willing to be helped. We've even written dictionaries for it and given it out. So we're working really hard to kind of wispatize LTE.
Aha.
That's a new term there. I like it.
Whisperize.
Yeah,
LTE.
whisperize. Yeah.
Wispatize.
There you go. All right, we'll eventually get it. So let me ask a couple questions, and these are going to be questions that both my customers and other customers or potential customers are going to ask. The very first thing is you had mentioned on the CPE that there is some type of ATA or something. Can you go into a little more depth on that?
It's just it's a screen in the CPE software. You just pull it up, and I guess to define what ports it is, it's completely built in. All you need to do is point it to a soft switch.
So you do that in the CPE configuration.
Yeah, it's right in there. So It's completely built in.
Okay, so
now will that be built in the next generation of CPEs? I don't know, but it's in there now.
Okay. So as far as us providing VoIP service, does the system provide quality of service for those VoIP calls?
Of course. And either in its WiMAX or LTE form. Absolutely. So, remember, this is a standard built to do this sort of thing, right? So you have almost an infinite level of kinds of QoS that you can do. You mentioned SIP, though. We just had a guy in Canada, up in the northeast of Canada, doing 30-kilometer SIP calls. You can imagine they were kind of grinning over that one.
Sure. So let's go back. So we got these APs. We're saying we can get plenty of CPEs out there. We're going to be able to get plenty of bandwidth to said customers. We have CPEs with integrated VoIP already, and I know you guys make other products such as a Wi-Fi box for inside, things like that. So pretty much everything. Now, are most operators going to configure these things similar to the products that are currently out? So when I say that, I mean, hey, let's toss up an AP, we plug an Ethernet jack into it, we PoE power that, we log into the radio, we program it as such, and then we start dropping in CPEs. Or is it completely different?
It's different than what you're used to. It's kind of a carrier grade thing, and the provisioning of the base station for the first time you do it, it's a slightly different language. So there is some complexity no matter how much time you have in service, so to speak. So what we do generally is we remote in and work with you on provisioning, or our partner does, on the first couple base stations. We hold hands really closely. I don't care who you buy through. You know me personally, and you know our engineers personally. And but once it's up, it's actually very, very easy. You have an NMS that's a full FCAPS NMS that gives you visibility into a level of granularity most people have never, ever seen. On the CPE side, you don't configure anything. You hang it, and it does all the work. There's no pre-configuration at all. Under LTE, there is you do have to import in some of the values in the SIM card, but that can be done in bulk as well. So, I mean, it is different the way it's provisioned, but it's not overly complex. It's just different, so you're just learning something a little bit new.
Sure.
But there's a lot of flexibility on the CPE. You can NAT, you can bridge, you can do PPOE, you can do whatever you want. So invariably, you'll be able to do things in the way that you're used to doing them. Do you do radius? Fine, we can support that. Do you do MAC level authentication? Fine, we can support that too.
Okay. And what kind of... You had mentioned the increased receive sensitivity. I don't think a lot of people understand that. Can you kind of go into that a little bit? Explain what does that actually mean, and how does it compare to the current generation of, especially 802.11, N and AC products that are coming on the market?
Okay. I can tell you... And you're looking at, I think, the same PDF that I'm looking at here. Most of you would never connect anything, I'm guessing, beyond maybe a minus, I don't know what, minus 80, minus 81 or something.
I think in most of our areas where we're at, in 5 gigahertz anyway, it would be neg 65 for us. I know a lot of customers go down to neg 70.
Okay, for our guys, even the ones that are trying to stay really tight, like, for example, we have a really nice customer in Ocala. He's very transparent and open with people. If anyone can manage to get his time, a guy named George Santiago, sometimes you see him on the WISPA list. His company is called BridgeNet, and he stays at minus 75 or better. But for us, that's full modulation. Under LTE, minus 75 can give you, if you're doing 70% down, 30 up, it can give you up to 90 plus megabits at minus 75. So wow. at minus 81, if you're doing it's like a 60-40 split, you're still at 40 megs on a downlink and 15 on an uplink. If you're doing it on the 730, it's about 50 megs on a downlink, about 7.8 or so on an uplink, and that's as bad as it's ever going to get. This is the first generation for us. The CPE that we're fielding today uses what's called a Category 4 LTE chipset. It's actually dual mode, by the way, so it's both WiMAX and LTE, which is really interesting for all those PMP320 guys. Can do some crazy stuff. But anyway, in LTE they define the rating of a CPE or a chipset on this category level. And a Category 4 is what's commonly available in the 3.x gigahertz space. And a Category 4 is limited to 16 QAM on the uplink. But next generation CPE, when the chipsets become more common, will have 64 QAM. And then there's one coming up, I think it's a Category 8, that even does 256 on the uplink and 4x receive on the uplink. On the CPE. Can you imagine a CPE doing 4x receive and 256 QAM? It's coming. So these numbers that I know you see in that one pager, and I'll send to anyone who wants it, these are the worst case. And you're talking about at minus 90, you're still talking about up to 11 megs downlink at a minus 90.
Is there any kind of range? I mean, obviously the 365 or the band will have its line of sight loss and such, but can you give us an example? What's your max range that you're finding?
Our max cell range right now, LTE is built off a 30 kilometer max range, and when I say the max range, the 30 kilometer max range means at full modulation. So in a true line of sight, true Fresnel line of sight, 30 kilometers would yield your maximum modulation.
Okay.
So your maximum throughput. Ours is ranging up to, we've got it up to 39 kilometers now, and that's a couple steps down from max modulation. And then there's a version coming out in our software, I forget if it's 7.0 or 7.5, which is the 100-kilometer ranging. It's not something we're creating. It's just something that's there in the LTE standard that we're importing. Most people won't use it, but there are guys, for example, in Utah, in Colorado, and maybe even New Mexico off some of the mesas or something where you could do 100-kilometer links. It becomes possible. It's an issue of the ranging. So when I'm telling you, for example, 70 to 80 plus megabits, I'm talking about full 30-kilometer at line of sight. Non-line of sight, it all changes. It depends on what the line of sight, non-line of sight is.
Sure. So let's talk about the non-line of sight capabilities of this. And just for everybody's knowledge, your 39 or your 30 kilometers about 18, 19 miles, and 39 kilometers about your 24, 25 mile range. Just so for those of you that are in the mile area, like the rest of the U.S. is, unlike the rest of the planet. When we go to the non-line of sight, what makes LTE in the same band as, again, 802.11 anything? What makes both your system and LTE work so much better in non-line of sight applications compared?
Dennis, I'm glad you asked that question because I wouldn't have thought to remind myself to say this. It's a very important distinction. LTE on its own means zip. Just like Wi-Fi on its own means nothing. Just like WiMAX on its own means nothing. All those standards do is define a certain speed at a given modulation. So how you achieve that modulation is everything. Because, great, I can get huge modulation, but what if I can only get that modulation up to 10 feet? You know what I'm saying? So the standard itself says nothing about the range. Range is all about the gear, the RF performance of the gear. So it's two sides of the equation. We're working in the LTE standard, which gives good throughput at a given modulation, but we have to have really good quality gear to achieve that modulation in challenging situations, which is what our stuff does. The 4x4, the much higher sensitivity, and things like that. We have even on the we have a really sophisticated algorithm on the ATPC side, so we're using very little power to achieve the high performance. But what kind of range do you get? I mean, in non-line of sight, we all know the only thing that's consistent with that concept is that you can't see the other end. Beyond that, it's entirely subjective. A guy in Albuquerque is non-line of sight if he's got a cottonwood in front of the house. A guy in Canada is non-line of sight if he's going through a bunch of spruce. A guy in Illinois is non-line of sight if he's going through some conifers that's a windbreak. It depends on everyone's version. I've got guys in the Appalachians who will tell you what non-line of sight is in a manner that most of us would have a heart attack at. All I can tell you is whatever you're able to do at 900, I can at least do that in terms of connecting, and I could, but in doing so, I can connect at a much higher throughput, right? So that's as good as I can give you an example. My 365 will do just as far or better as any 900 you're using, but we'll do it in a much higher capacity.
That's the ticket.
And I'll say that, and we offer a try and buy, and if it doesn't do what we say, you don't buy it. Your risk is buying it. Your risk is it doing what we are telling you it's doing. But I can be so cocky about this because this is what the customers are telling me. The guy in Florida, in Ocala, he goes up to 3 miles, and he has a lot of what they call live oaks in Florida draping beautifully over the streets. And he couldn't get a signal literally at all with any of the competitive stuff that he tried. All the common suspects, and even at 900, he couldn't get what he needed. He's getting at that same spot when he converts to LTE. Those links will go up to about 60 megs. Under WiMAX, he's getting comfortably 12. But it's a link he's getting. He's getting those at like minus 73.
Yeah.
I got pictures I can show people. I can send to them as well of a minus 67, which you would think is impossible because it's going through a huge bank of trees.
Right. We got some people on the chat singing your praises. So yeah, it must work the way it works. So, Patrick, I'm interested. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I go, this sounds interesting. My question is what gear is required? What I'm interested. I'm wanting to buy. How do we go about doing that? And what stuff do I get? And you made it sound like it is pretty simple to do client install. But what's the setup of the base station and all that gear entail? And you may have already answered this, but if you could just from the standpoint of someone ready to buy.
Yeah, I didn't really answer that part really well because the fact is on the actual procedure of the commissioning, I'm pretty stupid. Right, I know the 20,000-foot level, but we'll make it as painless as possible. No one is left to their own devices because they won't have a good experience, and then I'm in trouble. So we have to exercise a high degree of control over the first couple base stations with people, and there are some people, and you know who you are. You might be on this, who are stubborn and won't let our guys remote in to help them because they have X number of years of experience. Well, that's great, but guess what? Everything is new to someone one time, and so allow yourself to be helped and don't invent the wheel that's already there. But we'll do training, and a couple of our partners are really, really good at this stuff, and those that aren't really, really good at it yet, we're teaching them to be really, really good at it yet. So I've got a number of them. We're really cautious with who we bring on board. I may be talking to one future partner literally as we're speaking on this conversation, hopefully. But there are others. ISP Supplies is a new one in Texas. My long-standing one, who I love dearly like a brother, is PCS Technologies up in Minnesota. They're phenomenal. They can do everything, including stock. But they even do custom fab stuff. They're crazy. They used to do mostly work for telcos. I brought them kicking and screaming into the WISP world, and they're pretty darn happy I did. We'll teach you how to do this stuff. Let's just put it that way.
Right. So back to my initial question. I'm all in. What do I get, and what are the devices I get?
Okay, so you've got the base station, right? And the base station can be deployed in any number of ways. The idealized way is one base station to one 4-port 65-degree antenna. And 3 of those would make 360. Sounds counterintuitive, but those are dual slant antennas that roll off nicely at the edges, about 3 dB, and really provide about 120 coverage. So 3 of those actually does a really good 360. And you get maximum power density because it's an 18 dBi antenna. In fact, you have to turn the power down because we're pushing out so much power per port, 30 per port, or 36 dBm with all 4 ports. So you would have those. You can get that on a nice, simple frame. Some people do, some people don't. one GPS. It can daisy chain to up to 3 base stations on a tower. And then somewhere you have an enhanced packet core, which is something required in LTE. It's, in LTE, the base stations are just doing the RF work. All the other brains for authentication and hooks in the billing and the policy control, that all happens at the EPC. Now, the EPC can be done several different ways. For us, we have a model that allows it to be 100% embedded via software inside each base station. No one else in the world is doing that. The other option is a standalone one-view appliance that you can use. And then, when you have those, what we've done is we've made it even more granular, where you only buy the functionality that you need. For example, if you want MAC-level authentication, there's a module that plugs into that, so you don't have to have the full EPC, which normally in an LTE world is insanely expensive. A Cisco EPC is, 6 figures. We had to make this and make it palatable to a smaller WISP. So our EPC is much more, is much easier to swallow. I can tell you, on a very just rough basis, and I'll be shot for tossing out numbers at all probably, but I'll do it anyway because forgiveness is better than permission. In a 3 base station configuration, with everything, if you want to do rough planning numbers, you're roughly probably around $30,000. And that's with the management. That's with all that stuff. You don't have to have the management, but you'd be pulling your hair if you didn't. But what does that get you? That gets you probably better coverage than you can get with 3 to 4 times the number of sites as other stuff. It gets you capacity that today starts at about 300 megs for those 3 base stations on the tower. That within about 18 months moves up to about 1,200 megs. Same base stations, same tower, nothing but software. Right? So and it gets you the non-line of sight performance. So if you do all the math and it gets you this stuff in scale, then maybe you can make the numbers work. That's the CPE all day, worst case, roughly around 280. That comes with everything. The only thing it doesn't come with is the cable between the PoE and the outdoor. If you want the Wi-Fi portion of the CPE, which is to say you replace the PoE with a Wi-Fi gateway that you can manage over the network yourself, that pushes the PoE to the outdoor CPE and does 802.11n, 2x MIMO inside the home and 2.4. Your number on that's probably between $40 and $46, which is, I think it's a pretty decently priced addition to a CPE to control that piece inside the customer's home or business. And
that includes your VoIP port as well, still, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Whenever we look at this, you also have to look at 99% of the time, I know a lot of customers, what they're doing is they have a CPE, so whatever type of CPE, you figure that cost. Then they come in and now they add a router, and then they add an ATA, and then they still have a PoE jack. So you have 8 boxes that have to plug in by the time it's all said and done, just to give the customer one port of internet, one port or a little bit of wireless AP in their house, and a VoIP line.
No, that's all. We don't do the cobble together stuff. It's a complete box. It's all there. You use the part of it that you need. You don't that you don't. And that number is the worst case. And the reason it's as high as it is because that's both a WiMAX and LTE CPE. It has both chipsets. And the only reason why we did that is because we don't just invent something and throw it out there. We have the burden of having to be backward compatible as much as possible. Our thing is always trying to protect the investment of the customers. So we have a lot of customers that are 4 or 5 years old with old legacy WiMAX from the Alvarian days that we have to provide a path forward. So this CPE is kind of that bridge CPE that takes them from that path to this path. And the next generation will just be LTE only, and it'll be a magnitude less. One of the cool things, by the way, about that CPE is, and we just learned about this, someone on the list posted this on the Telrad list just last night. I didn't know it was happening, but they were working with my engineer. They connected my 7000 model dual mode CPE to a Cambium 320 AP, and they got 34 megs. which is kind of crazy. So there are ways that we can even help you extend the investment in competitive technology. And oh, by the way, a 320 SM will connect to our base station and will perform better than it does across its own base station. I've seen instances where the link budget increased as much as 10 dB because of the better specs. And the throughput will increase because it's a later model chipset on the WiMAX side. So, it's pretty cool. We can give people a really nice, patient, smooth migration path if they've got stranded product out there. And oh, by the way, that wasn't planned. That's just dumb luck on our part. But it's great, and a lot of people are going to benefit from that. And I'm talking to an awful lot of guys about that very thing. I got 2 webinars this afternoon with 2 of those kinds of users.
So you mentioned, just to reiterate, the CPE is powered by PoE.
Correct.
What about the base station? How does that run power?
Thanks. Good question. That's neg 48 volts. So, it's kind of telco grade stuff. We've got a gig port on it, a gig E. We also have an SFP. There's also a 10100 port. And that 10100 port supports both in-band management and out-of-band. So it's bridged externally, so you can actually use it to direct connect a backhaul, a camera, or something like that. And then the top, you've got your 4 RF ports, and then you've got a GPS port in, and then you've got a sync port out for the GPS. But it's not PoE powered. We don't buy into that on the base station side. We don't think that's a very robust way to do things, especially if you have electrical issues.
So are we running coax LMR 400 to this device, or is it like a power cable, hot?
No, it's a power cable.
Okay, gotcha.
No, in fact, the only reason you'd be doing LMR is if you're going some distance from the antenna to the base station. But the idealized way, it's a short, low-loss jumper that's about 12 inches.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this is, if I remember correctly, it's IP67 certified, correct?
Both the base station and the CPE. And, it's funny, I don't know if a lot of people really know what those numbers mean, because we tend to think that they're linear, like 54, 55, 56. They're not. In fact, the numbers have no relation to each other except that they exist side by side. The first number refers to particulate intrusion, solid matter. An IP rating with the first number being a 5 implies kind of protected against spray, like jet-like spray, like from a driving rain, where an IP6 is full waterproof. And then you have the second number. The first number deals with particulate. I'm sorry. So the 5 means dust protected. The 6 means dust proof. The second number deals with liquid intrusion, and a 5 means the jet spray, and a 7 means waterproof, as in submersible to 1 meter for up to 30 minutes. Now, I've had other people that laugh at that on the list and say, I'm never going to flood. That's not the point. The point is, and especially if you're in Mexico, Stephen, you've got lots of temperature extremes, and the extremes can happen over the course of a couple days. Yeah. If you're in the panhandle of Texas, the joke is, a guy I was talking to today, you can experience winter, and you have 2 seasons, winter and summer, and they can both be within the same week.
Yeah.
So you get thermal expansion, and that deteriorates or degrades seals, connector housings, that sort of thing. So humidity, moisture, dust, etc., ultimately get in there over time. We believe the CPE deserves the same IP rating as the base station. So ours are IP67. You mentioned base station's typical configuration. If you're ultra rural, there is a single base station sort of model. You could just use 2 dual port omnis, really good high quality omnis, 10 lambda apart, and operate in 4x4 and 360 off 1 base station, but with all the typical omni caveats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also note that, as you said, there's an SFP, and that's very important, because we find a lot of people, you're running 400, 500 foot up on your tower. Now all of a sudden you have an optical carrier that you can bring that all the way down to the bottom of your tower. etc., along with the power.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, I'm an old fiber tech. I was the guy in the manhole doing the fusion splicing. I love fiber, so yeah, it's just a nice option. And also, you have guys like where you are, and people in the Appalachian Mountains where the high mineral content in the mountains draws in the lightning. And certainly where I live, you have an incredible amount of lightning. The opportunity to do fiber is really nice and isolating the rest of your network.
Let me ask a question about the PoE adapter. I've seen it. I've seen pictures of it and such, and it's an interesting adapter. So you have the PoE out. You have a little cable that goes to like their device or their router, and then you have the POTS ports. How does that work? I mean, this is just more of my information. Do you actually send the POTS lines down on a pair coming from the CPE, or is there some type of connectivity, board or something inside that does it?
Good and fair question. So the way it used to work on an earlier model CPE, it was a single cable that went from the outdoor to the indoor. And we got that UL certified. But the problem with that, it was a non-standard pinout. And what does everyone hate? Almost as much as an ISP hates spam, they hate non-standard pinouts. So what we decided to do on the 7000 model is just go back to the normal arrangement. Whereas if you do want to take advantage of the VoIP and the SIP client, then you're running a second cable between the PoE and the outdoor CPE. There's a specific port for that. So it's a 2-cable run instead of a single cable if you're doing that.
Sure. The one question we have on our live chat, it's as he says, it's a nitpicky thing. On the 7000, is there any type of Ethernet stats in the GUI?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
He says he hasn't found it yet.
Yeah, I mean, for example, it depends on what. Is he not using any of the NMS functionality to do that?
Well, I can't answer that, but he's just saying, is there an Ethernet? Is the Ethernet physically plugged in, and is there any type of Ethernet errors? Maybe something like a duplex mismatch or something is what he's looking for.
Again, I get pretty stupid the deeper you go on that stuff. So I can get that answer if he wants to hit me off show, and I'll try to get him the answer because I really don't know. I'm not competent enough to know that level of, even though I probably should, that level of detail about what you can do. I just know it has, it has the iPerf, so you can actually run data across it, and it has built-in ping and the other things. But I'm not sure in terms of what Ethernet counters and things like that it's got native into the CPE software.
Gotcha. Alrighty. Stephen, you got anything else? I think he's, obviously sold many people, and this is, when we look at this is just another tool in the toolbox.
Yes.
It's not going to be for everybody, but it's also going to be for a lot of people. And it's that other tool to say, hey, whenever XYZ is not working, now we have another option. And what I really like about this solution being a fully software-defined radio, like Patrick was mentioning, is that in our current lifespan, what we're finding in most WISPs is you have really 2 to 3 years. That's it, 2 to 3 years of an access point's viability. And by that I mean, all of a sudden, back a couple of years ago, 802.11b was great, and that's all you needed. And then G came out. Oh, look at this, better speeds. And then N came out, and A. And we have all these extra things. So what we find is a lot of providers out there are sitting there spending a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money, in the upgradability of these systems. So in other words, they're going out and tossing in a new AP, and then they're going out to every CPE and changing the CPEs for the new standard because they need more capacity. They need more ability. And being a software-defined radio like this, we will have the advantage to toss them up, leave them up, not mess with it for 7 or more years even. Right. So you have to think about what is the cost of changing out. Even if you had to survive one change, assume in the next 2-3 years you're not going to have to change out your CPEs and your APs. Those costs are actually relatively inexpensive. The cost that is expensive is the installer time, in the planning, in the customer service nightmare that it goes with hey, we need to come out and change out your CPE. That is an insane amount of time in cost to get that type of thing done. So whenever you look at it this way, is if you purchase these types of products, these LTE products, and you don't have to change out the CPE once. Not alone. I mean, we're talking 7 to 8 years lifespan versus 2 to 3. So it's possible that you might have to change your equipment out twice if you're not running a software-defined radio like this. Mm-hmm. So even if you do it once, how much money are you ahead of the game?
You're hired. But also, that is very true. And you used the word LTE. I'd like to almost to leave with one thought that's kind of controversial, perhaps, because there's a lot of angst happening about what the FCC is going to do with the 355 and the 365. And that's appropriate. That angst is appropriate. But here is what I'm projecting, and I've been pretty darn good with my projections over the course of the years that I've been in this business. 355 is going to happen. It's going to happen this year. I think the world is driving to LTE. It's already taken over everything in mobility. There is no more GSM. There is no more CDMA. There is no more UMTS. Everything is LTE. And it's pushing its way into fixed like a juggernaut. I think it's like going from an era of prop planes to jet engines. I think we're in the middle of an absolutely legitimate, total, real shift in the way technology works and even in fixed wireless. And why I think the 355 thing makes things even, for me, I think, even much better for opportunity is people think that their ability to use this spectrum is going to go away. But there's a couple things they should pay attention to. One of the things in the NPRM that existed, both the first one that came out in December of 2012 and is still there subsequent, and the FNPRM that appeared not so long ago, is this idea of priority access. And if you look at who they're talking about on priority access, it isn't a WISP. A WISP would be under the GAA level. But one of the people they list as maybe having priority access would be, say, a city doing some what could be considered critical infrastructure or healthcare or whatever. So what does that mean? Think about how those cities, and there's over 16,000 small towns in the country, how those cities do that today. You know how they do any of that stuff today? They pay Verizon monthly rates, or whoever monthly rates, and they probably pay it twice for redundancy for all their police, fire, or if they're connecting. You look at the red boxes out there, how those are connected. You're looking at parking meters like where I live. They're all connected wirelessly. Those are all contracts to the major cellular carriers. If in doing what the FCC is about to do, give some level of prioritization, but not exclusivity, so you'll still be able to use it too, but some level of prioritization to these cities to do this kind of stuff, you will see cities dumping their contracts with the big carriers left and right and deciding that they can do this stuff themselves, but most likely partnering with someone like a local WISP to build and manage these networks for them. And they're not going to do it in proprietary. They're going to do it in LTE-based 355. Why? Because parking meters, traffic systems, cameras, they are going to come with embedded 355 LTE chips. It is going to happen. It is going to happen. And if you are using and you're forklifting whatever you're doing now to a 365 that is proprietary, you're completely going to miss out on all that potential that you could do that as an entirely new revenue stream inside your business. And I know there are a couple forward-thinking guys I've been talking to who are talking to cities already about doing this stuff. I know some cities getting ready to build it already now. I already know some that have already done it in its first version of 365. City of Houston, for example, has over 180 365 base stations from the old Alvarian days migrating on over to compact with over 22,000 devices connected. SCADA sort of things. So all this stuff is moving to LTE, and if you're not playing in LTE, you're going to miss out on all that potential opportunity. What's the worst case that I'm wrong? Worst case that I'm wrong means that you still get to use interoperable devices like CPE or whatever. And that ain't a bad worst case. In the best case, if I'm right and you're doing something different, you're going to get run over. That's what I think. And, people know I tell it pretty straight. Yes, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but I believe the Kool-Aid, man.
Yeah, and like you said, with your software-defined radios, it sounds like it could go to the 3.5 no problem.
Yeah, our operational range on the one we have in the U.S. runs from 3.4 to 3.7. So it's already there. We just have to turn it on. Right. And the SAS part of it, that's just software too. We can do that in software. We probably won't even need a third-party appliance to interface in between it. We'll be able to do that via software. So, hardware, just one piece of hardware.
Fun. I have one last question. We're getting ready to run over time here, but one last question. The current products, they are, as you said, they're specifically designed for either your 2.4 or 2.3 to 2.5, and then the 3.65 or 3.55 band.
Correct.
The question that we had was there any plans, or is there anything going to be up in the 5 gigahertz band?
Actually, there already is. Because remember, this is a software-defined radio, and it has a WiMAX side. On the WiMAX side, there's some products that runs from roughly around the 5.15 to 5.25. It's not widely talked about but there are certain entities like the FAA that uses that. Our trick, I'm not bugging people about that now because we can't find an LTE chipset that works in that space. If we did and had that now, we'd be shipping that now. I think that'll probably come along towards the end of the year there. So, yes. So, do I believe there's going to be a 5.15 to 5.25 version? I want that band because it's non-DFS. So we just have to get the LTE chipset for that side. And then there's other bands potentially over time. But
Sounds good. Steve, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, well, we've been talking with Patrick Leary of Telrad. Patrick, tell us if people are interested, how they get in contact with you to look into this further.
For better or for worse, I'm one of the easiest guys on the planet to find. I'm at patrick.leary at telrad.com. I'll even give out my cell number, and I'll get to people live if I can, and if not, I'll call them back. At least I try to. It's 727-501-3735. Also on the Telrad website, there's a contact form that will route its way to Israel and make its way to me. So you can just circumvent that and go to me directly, and I can push you to the proper person, including our partners.
Well, I agree with you. If you're not dabbling in LTE already, I agree with Patrick. You need to start looking at it. It's going to be a freight train coming down the rails that's going to smack you if you're not on board.
Yeah, well, LTE and we'll be there in force at WISP America.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank Patrick Leary, the Director of Business Development for North America for Telrad, telling us all about their product. It's just sounds pretty darn incredible, and by the chats that we've had on our show, it sounds like there's a lot of people out there that have tried this out and they really like it. So maybe it would behoove you all to give Patrick a call and see what they might be able to do for you. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the show. Again, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Dennis, for producing the show. And we will look forward to talking to you all next week.
Dennis and Stephen, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to ISP Radio. We hope you've gained new insights and additional wisdom in our industry as well as your business. Please remember to visit our show sponsors via the links on ispradio.com. If you're interested in becoming a show sponsor, contact us at sales@ispradio.com. Now go out there and push those